I fell in love with Valeria, my neighbor, without knowing that our families were at odds because of old grudges, despite that we continued to fight against everything. From the moment I saw it, I knew that my life would never be the same again. It's not an exaggeration, nor an attempt to make my story more interesting than it actually was. It's the truth. Because when Valeria moved in next door, my world, once quiet and predictable, changed completely. I lived with my parents in a middle-class neighborhood where everyone knew each other, or at least pretended to know each other. My life was simple: college, a few friends, and constant pressure from my parents to focus on a stable future. Love, relationships, all of that seemed secondary to them. But I had never felt a real urge to fall in love.
If you like this video, stay until the end, like, subscribe, and activate the bell for more videos.
Until Valeria appeared. The day I met her, I was in my room, looking out the window without much interest, when I saw her get out of a van with her mother. She wore a yellow dress that highlighted her brown skin and hair pulled back in a high ponytail. His expression was serene, but his eyes shone with a hint of melancholy, as if he were leaving something important behind. "Whose son?" I asked my mother when I saw her leaning out of the living room window as well. She frowned. "Los Montes. They finally sold that house." His tone was dry, distant. "Do you know them?" "Let's say that our families don't get along." He slammed the curtain shut, as if he could erase his presence. That answer piqued my curiosity, but I didn't ask any more. I would find out on my own. That same afternoon, as I was taking out the trash, I saw her again. He was sitting on the small step at the entrance, checking his cell phone. I hesitated for a second, but in the end I walked towards her. "Hello," I said with a smile. He looked up and smiled back. "Hello. I'm Daniel. I live next door." "Valeria." She held out her hand and I shook it. Her skin was soft, warm. There was a brief silence, one of those that should be uncomfortable, but that felt natural with her. "Where do you come from?" I finally asked. "From another neighborhood, but not very far." He looked down. The house we lived in was no longer an option. I didn't want to insist, but I felt that there was a story behind it. The days passed, and every time I saw her, we exchanged a few words. It started with quick greetings, then short conversations about college, the weather, anything. Until one day, when I was returning from shopping, I found her on the sidewalk with a book in her hands. "Do you like reading?" I asked, pointing to the book. "I love it." He lifted the cover. 100 Years of Solitude. Smiled. "Good choice." That day we talked for hours. I discovered that we shared a love of literature and film, that I had a sarcastic sense of humor, and a laugh that stuck in my head long after the conversation ended. Little by little, the line between neighbors and something else began to blur. The problem started when my parents noticed how much I talked to her. One night, while we were having dinner, my mother put her fork down on the plate with a thud and looked at me seriously. "Have you been spending a lot of time with the Montes' daughter?" My father looked up from his cell phone. "Who?" "Valeria, the new neighbor," my mother replied with a grimace. My father frowned and crossed his arms. "I hope you're not messing with that family." "Why do they talk about them like that?" I asked, annoyed. They looked at each other, as if debating whether or not to tell me the truth. "Your family and ours have a complicated history," my father finally said. "What story?" "You don't need to know. The important thing is that you keep your distance. We don't want problems." I didn't insist, but her warning only made me want to see her more. The first kiss came one night when we were chatting in his back garden. We were talking about everything and nothing at once, when suddenly the silence became different. More charged, more intense. "Why do our parents hate each other?" I asked quietly. Valeria sighed. My mom never wanted to tell me. She only mentioned that there was a betrayal many years ago. What if it was a lie? What if it were true? We looked at each other. Her eyes reflected the moonlight, and without much thought, I leaned over and kissed her. It was a shy kiss at first, but then I felt like we were both giving up on the moment. When we separated, she was smiling with a mixture of surprise and happiness. I think we just disobeyed our families. Yes, I answered, and I don't regret it. From that moment on, everything changed. We sought each other in secret, escaping from any opportunity. We were like characters in a forbidden story, enjoying every second before reality caught up with us. But reality is always enough. One afternoon, as we were walking hand in hand on a nearby street, we heard a voice behind us. Daniel. I turned and saw my father, his face red with fury. Valeria let go of my hand immediately. Home! He shouted, and I knew that everything was about to explode. When I got home, the door slammed shut behind me. My father didn't say anything at first, just looked at me with a mixture of disappointment and anger while my mother, sitting in the living room, avoided my gaze. We told you to stay away from that family, he said finally, his voice low but strained. And why exactly? I asked, crossing my arms. What's wrong with him? My mother sighed and put her hands to her face. Daniel, please don't make this harder. The only thing they're making difficult is my life, I replied, frustrated. I fell in love with Valeria. I'm not going to leave her just because you have a problem with your family. My father touched the table with his fist. It's not just a problem. Do you want to know the truth? It is okay. He took a deep breath before continuing. Many years ago, our family business was on the verge of bankruptcy because Valeria's father betrayed your grandfather. They were partners, lifelong friends. But he took advantage of your grandfather's trust and left him broke. We had to rebuild everything from scratch. It was a betrayal we will never forget. I was silent. It was a strong story, yes, but it didn't justify me having to move away from Valeria. That was between his parents, not between her and me. It's your blood, Daniel. My father raised his voice. I don't want you to repeat our mistakes. I stared at him and said what I knew would hurt him the most. Then I'm sorry to disappoint you, because I'm not going to stop watching her. Before I could answer, I went upstairs to my room and slammed the door shut. That night, Valeria and I spoke by text. My mom found out too, she wrote. He said my dad would never approve of this. And what do you think? There was a pause before his answer came. That I don't want to leave you. Then we won't. And with that, we decided to continue seeing each other in secret. The following days were tense. At home, my parents barely spoke to me. But that didn't matter to me, because every time I saw Valeria, it was all worth it. We were in hidden places, the library, a small cafe far from the neighborhood, even on the roof of his house when his parents were not there. In those moments, we felt invincible. But illusion doesn't require much. One afternoon, while we were in the park, Valeria received a call from her mother. His face changed immediately. My dad found out, she whispered. What did he say? That he wants to talk to you. I tense up. I knew it wouldn't be a friendly chat, but I nodded. Whenever you want. Now. The meeting was at home. His father, a man with a stern face and a hard look, received me into the room. Valeria stood to the side, nervous. So you're Daniel, he said in a firm voice. Yes, sir. He crossed his arms and studied me. I guess you know who I am and what happened between our families. I nodded. I know, but with respect, sir, that has nothing to do with us. His eyes hardened. Don't underestimate the weight of the past. I stared at him. With all due respect, the past should not decide our future. He fell silent. Then he sighed and ran a hand over his face, as if he were debating something. "I'm not an irrational man," he said at last, "but I can't ignore what happened either." He turned to Valeria. "I don't want you to suffer for something that has no future." Valeria pursed her lips, but her voice was firm when she answered, "Dad, I love him." My heart skipped a beat when I heard those words. His father looked at us for a long moment. Then he got up and said, "I'll think about it." It was the closest we had to an approval. I left the house with Valeria by the hand. Tension was still in the air, but there was hope. "I think we succeeded," I said quietly. She smiled. "I think so. But we didn't yet know that the worst was yet to come. We thought we had won. That time and patience would make our parents accept our relationship. But what we didn't know was that fate still had more difficult trials for us." Everything fell apart a week later. One night, I received a call from Valeria. His voice trembled. "My parents had a horrible argument about us. My dad is furious. He says that talking to you was a mistake, that they will never accept us." I was silent, feeling a knot in my stomach. "Where are you now?" "In my room. But I can't take it anymore, Daniel. I don't want to live like this, hiding like we're doing something wrong." "I'm coming for you." "What?" "Wait for me at the corner of your house." There was a pause. "Okay." I put on a jacket and went out of my bedroom window to prevent my parents from seeing me. I walked quickly to the corner and, when I saw her appear, I knew this was different. There were tears in his eyes, but also determination. "Let's go away," he whispered. I took her face in my hands and kissed her with all the desperation of someone who knows that she can lose the most important thing in her life. "I can't leave everything like this, Valeria," I said. "But I don't want to lose you either." "So what do we do?" I took a deep breath. "Let's talk to our parents one last time. If after that they are still against it, we will make a decision." She assented, though her eyes still reflected fear. The next morning, I confronted my parents. "I love Valeria," I said bluntly, "and I'm not going to leave her." My mother closed her eyes, as if she wanted to disappear. "Daniel." "No, Mom. No more excuses. No more rancor from the past. We cannot live tied to what happened years ago." My father rubbed his face in frustration. "What if you end up suffering?" "What if this doesn't last?" "Then at least I'll know that I fought for what I wanted." There was a long silence. Then my mother looked at me sadly. "You're just like your grandfather." I didn't know if he meant it as an insult or a compliment. My father sighed. "We'll hold a meeting." "With the Montes." My heart skipped a beat. "Are you serious?" "I don't promise anything. But I don't want to lose you because of past resentment." That night, the two families sat face to face in the living room of my house. The atmosphere was tense, as if a bomb was going to explode at any moment. Valeria's father was the first to speak. "I never thought I'd be here." My father approaches with a grimace. "Neither do I." There was an awkward silence until my mother broke it. "They love each other." We all looked at her in surprise. She sighed and continued, "We live with resentments that should no longer affect us. If we continue to cling to the past, what are we teaching them?" Valeria's father looked down. "I just wanted to protect my daughter." My father listens. "Me too. But maybe it's time to let the past stay where it belongs." There was another silence, until Valeria's father turned to her. "Is this what you really want?" She nodded. He exhaled and then, for the first time all night, slightly. "Then I won't be the one to get in the way." My mother called me and looked at my father. "And you?" My father rubbed his forehead, sighed, and then looked at me. "Make me proud." It was the closest thing to a blessing I could receive. I took Valeria's hand and squeezed him tightly. We had achieved it. A year later, we were still together. Our families still had their differences, but over time they learned to tolerate each other. The past did not disappear, but it ceased to be a barrier. Because love, when it is real, does not give up. And we were the proof of that.